Biden will hit the campaign trail today with a trip to Florida. In Fort Lauderdale, the president is set to discuss what his administration has done to strengthen Medicare and Social Security protections for Americans. The president also will reunite with former President Barack Obama on the trail this weekend. The White House says the two leaders will take the stage together in Philadelphia on Saturday to stump for Pennsylvania's Democratic nominees for governor and Senate, Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman. Let's bring in NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki at his post at the big board 1 week from the midterm. Steve, good morning. What are you looking at?
Yeah, well, we've been monitoring the big picture political climate. And take a look at this. New numbers from Gallup asking folks here, what is the top issue, or really, what are the issues you consider extremely important as you make up your mind? And you can see, not surprisingly, the economy continues to finish first there. You see abortion, crime, gun policy, immigration. What's striking about this poll from Gallup is you then ask folks who cite the economy as extremely important or abortion as extremely important. You ask them, OK, are you going to vote for the Democrats or are you going to vote for the Republicans? Is there a partisan advantage on these issues at all? And look at it, how this kind of jumps out at you here on 4 of the top 5 issues that voters identify Republicans with the advantage on. 3 of those with significant advantages, over 30 points on the economy, nearly 30 points on crime, more than 30 on immigration, slight on gun policy. The one Democratic advantage here, it is double digits, is on the issue of abortion here. Obviously, Democrats have been playing that up as aggressively as they can since the Supreme Court ruling back at the end of June. So you look at this screen, you look at these issues, you look at these Republican advantages, and you say that should add up to a pretty overwhelming Republican climate. Where it gets a little bit complicated is you take a look at the generic ballot, and we've been tracking this every week. Do you want Democrats? Do you want Republicans to be running Congress? When you put it that way to people, well, we're getting some mixed signals. There's a couple different places out there that average these together, so I'll give you a sense of the range here. Real Clear Politics, they've been doing this for 20 years. Their average has the Republicans leading on the generic ballot by a little bit under 3 points. That's where it's been in this average for the last couple of weeks. 538, which also does this. It's not all of the same polls between these two. There's a different formula involved here. There's some complexity, but basically the 538 average has it at just a tick under a point. Republican advantage in both of them, but a difference there of about 1 point and 3 points. Again, we're talking about a situation where Republicans just need a net gain of 5 seats to get control of the House. So anything in this range would probably be enough to get them the House. But there is a big question here about potentially the magnitude. Is it something they just get by a small margin, or is there a bigger wave that takes shape? So that's some suspense there on the generic ballot compared to those issue polls I was just showing you. You take a look at the Senate battleground again. In blue, 5 most vulnerable Democratic seats. In red, 5 most vulnerable Republican seats. Name of the game for Republicans is they need a net gain of 1 seat to break that 50-50 tie that now goes to Democrats because of Kamala Harris. So break it down. Of those Democratic seats, take a look at the polling averages in those Democratic-held seats, and you can see that actually Georgia right now, Herschel Walker, slight lead in the polling average in Georgia over Raphael Warnock, 0.7 of 1 point. Georgia's a runoff state. Nobody right now in the polling average in Georgia is over 50. So if they both finish south of 50% in election night, they'll do it all over again in a runoff on December 6th. But potentially, let's just say for the sake of showing you how this could play out, if Georgia flipped to the Republicans, or if one of these other states flipped to the Republicans, then Democrats have to flip one from the Republican side to maintain balance, to counter the Republican gain. And that's why all year Pennsylvania has loomed so large. You just mentioned Barack Obama, Joe Biden. They're going to be there in Philadelphia on election eve with John Fetterman. This race is crucial for Democrats. It's a state that Biden won in 2020. It's the only one of these 5 Republican seats here where consistently Democrats have led in the polling. It's gotten closer in the polling. You can see on the average, Fetterman now up by 1 point. It was basically 9 over the summer. It's come all the way down to 1 a week before the election. But this is the seat. If Democrats get this would be a pickup. Remember, it's a Republican-held seat right now, and it would allow them to lose one from this column because we show you Georgia, but Nevada looks shaky for them as well. Arizona, they've gotten a little bit more encouraging news in the polling, especially yesterday from the New York Times. New Hampshire, I might add, looms as a bit of a wild card. A lot of national Republicans just kind of gave up on this New Hampshire race when Don Bolduc became the nominee. They swung and missed at recruiting a bunch of Republicans they thought could win the state. The polling, though, that's been coming back in New Hampshire, a lot closer than expected, so it looms as a wild card. But the bottom line is, if one of these goes, Democrats need to counter it over here. Pennsylvania continues to loom as by far their best shot at that. So no surprise you're going to see Obama, Biden, the whole crew in Philadelphia the Saturday before the election.
Yeah, bringing out the big guns in Pennsylvania. So, Steve, a little bit of a viewer's guide for election night, which we should be prepared for like we were last time in terms of counting the votes. Pennsylvania, for example, they don't start to count the mail-in vote till Election Day, to the great frustration of a lot of people. So what might Election Day, the day after, what might this look like as it rolls out?
Yeah, I see with cautious optimism. I'll go back to that map here, that this will be quicker than 2020. Because if you remember in 2020, Pennsylvania got called finally for Joe Biden Saturday at about 11:30 a.m. That was the call that gave Biden the presidency. And at that point, we still hadn't called North Carolina. We still hadn't called Georgia. We still hadn't called Arizona. We still hadn't called Nevada. So that was what happened in 2020. Now, there's some hope that it might be a little bit more efficient this year in Pennsylvania. You're right. The big issue in Pennsylvania in 2020 was they had never really done mass-scale mail-in voting before. They weren't prepared for it, and the state law was never changed to allow them to process this flood of mail-in ballots ahead of time. That hasn't changed. The state law hasn't changed, but the number of people voting by mail may be significantly lower this time. The counties may be more prepared to deal with what they do get this time. Also, Pennsylvania has financially incentivized the counties basically to stay open around the clock until they can get things counted. So there's some reason to think that Pennsylvania may be a little bit quicker. Again, you look at North Carolina. It was a 75,000 vote victory for Donald Trump in that state. It was a close race in 2020. Again, the volume of mail voting high when you consider a few years ago, but potentially lower, significantly lower when you compare it to 2020. And the mail is what slowed things down in North Carolina. North Carolina does allow for the pre-processing and the pre-tallying of the early vote and the mail-in vote. So we could get a much earlier read out of North Carolina. We could get an earlier read out of Georgia this time. There are some signs from these states that we might know a little bit more, a little bit sooner. I do think Arizona, though, it's pretty established in Arizona. If the races are close in Arizona, that's going to take a couple days. And Nevada, too, could take a couple days as well. And by the way, if it ever came down to it, if it ever came down to Democrats actually having a shot to hang on to the House, and we're talking like they end up with 220, 221 seats, that Democratic majority would ultimately be made in the state of California. It would come down to California, a whole bunch of districts there. California will take a month to count the votes in those districts. So if House control really ever is on the line, it's election month.
All right, so we'll settle in for that. Steve, thanks so much. We appreciate it.